Hey, what is up everybody? So we got 6 spoilers to go over today. Technically 5, I've gone over one of them already, but now that we have the rest of the context for the archetype, we're going to look at it again, and that would be Ursa. We'll get into it right away, because again I got 6 cards to talk about right now. Starting with Karant. Obviously, Karant was spoiled a bit ago, but I haven't talked about him yet, so we're talking about him before we get to all the interesting goodies from yesterday. So Karant's a 3-1 for 1 Frost. When this Karant receives 1 or more Frost, you can turn up to 2 Frost from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. That sounds pretty good. If this was in water with Poseidon, this card would be amazing. Now, it's not in water, and we don't know what the Frost Divine Rune does, and we don't know what the Frost Nexus Celestial is going to do yet. If the Frost Nexus Celestial is playable, this will be playable. And honestly, even if the Nexus Frost Celestial wasn't playable, this is probably still going to be playable because of Emfrostics. So if you look at Emfrostics from forever ago, added a spoiler somewhere, it is 2 costs from your hand to discard it to target an Elestral in your Underworld and return it into play. So this basically allows you to use Emfrostics for free to bring Karant back, giving you basically a free special cast from your Underworld. So you could potentially have some kind of weird recovery reanimation deck where you run Catarants and Rise from the Ashes and stuff to go into 2-drops easier, giving you access to a lot more options to get free, basically, Underworld recursion, which is very interesting. Which means you could potentially maybe make like a tanky Frost deck where you're just kind of taking some hits, playing Catarant, reanimating Catarant, taking just hits, and then playing Catarant and ascending into something. We don't know what you're going to ascend into yet, but there's options there. So I think Karant would be good there, especially if you can do like reanimate Karant, have your Divine Frost Rune in play, then normal from hand a Nexus Frost Celestial, and then Nexus 1 to Karant, and all of a sudden you're going up spirits, you have 2 things in play. That's pretty good. So I think Karant's going to see some amount of play at worst, just because it's a Frost recovery card. If Frost has no other recovery cards, this is kind of like a pros cons to Sluggle or Quackle, whereas less spirits, but it's repeatable, which is awesome. So that's Karant. Then we're going to go over Ursa real quick again. I've talked about this in the past when it was first spoiled. So it's a 2-3 for 1 Frost. When it's attacked during the damage step, you can return the attacking Celestial to its owner's hand. It's a shield on a body. It's going to let you probably stick and get to a 2-drop if it doesn't get hard removed. So they're going to soak hard removal, or it's going to get you 2-drop. It's kind of like a foamy in a sense, but instead of floating into something else, you're taking tempo away from your opponent with the bounce. So there's some pros and cons to, say, a foamy style playstyle with this. So I think it's going to be a decent card. It's probably only going to be like a 1 or 2 of in the actual Ursa deck, just like a tutor it out, play it, tech it against something so your opponent can't keep swinging at you. It'll be really awkward to play this against an opponent who's basically all in on, say, like a Pantera, and then all of a sudden they have no more spirits left and they can't get over the Ursa. So I think it's a good tech card. I think it's only going to see a little bit of play, maybe 1 or 2 of it in a main deck, since it will be searchable at most, and then maybe you see an extra one in the side deck for certain matchups. But it's a shield on a body that is, you know, good and bad. If it gets suppressed, it's not going to do anything. So if we have more suppressed tools, it's going to be a little bit worse. But you can think of it almost like foamy, where it gets you to 2-drops or gives you tempo in, not the fact that you get to keep floating into stuff, but it gives you tempo and it removes something from board. So that's pretty good. Ursa, this is what I mentioned when I said it's searchable. So it's a 1-3 for 1 Frost. When you normal cast this Ursa, you can search your deck for an Ursa, Elestral, or Rune and add it to your hand. So we'll get to the Rune in a little bit, but this is a searcher in Ursas. It's kind of like a Rummagem. You could almost think of it like an in-element searcher. Its stats are kind of mediocre, but it'll let you find out any Ursa card that you want. The pool is right now a little limited. You're probably generally just going to pull out like an Ursmog or Ursir or the Rune that we'll go into in a moment, just to like get more tempo. Because if you play this turn 1, find an Ursmog, then play Ursmog into something else, that's 2 Ursas right there. If you play it with the Stadium Room we're getting into, that potentially gets you into a 3-drop on turn 2 and have some extra bears to flood with. So I think Ursa's probably going to be seeing like 1 or 2 of play. It's a good searcher, but I don't think its stats let it exist at more than like 2 of in a deck, maybe 3 of if you're pushing it, or if there's more runes that we see in the future for Ursas, but the Ursa search Elestral part isn't that great because the Ursas themselves aren't super big, but the searching for a rune is really interesting and going to be probably really good down the line as we get more Ursa cards. And then Ursa, the thing that actually allows bears to exist and be played. So it's 3/1 for 1 frost. This Ursa gets +2 attack for each other Ursa on your field. And we have more tools to go wider with Ursas now, especially with the ability to search for Ursas that don't want to get attacked because they'll bounce things. So you're more likely to have Ursas in play, and then now you have Ursa. You could, Ursa Coat, float into Ursa. All of a sudden now you have a 3-attack Ursa, then play another Ursa, now you have 2 5-attackers. So this is going to activate Ursas, I think, in the early game, allow them to actually stand up a little bit in the early game. Give or take, I mean, this thing can get up to what? +6 attack, so it goes up to 9, potentially, which is pretty good for a 1-drop if you have a full board. And getting a full board on Ursas is probably not too difficult, especially when we get to the den in a moment. But I think Ursa is probably the best Ursa we see so far, and it's pretty strong, so we'll see what it can do. And then the den. This is the big thing. So Ursa Den, it's a 1 fire, 1 frost, so it's our first 2-cost stadium rune. This is spoiled a little bit ago, but I never went over it, but we're going over it now. It's Ursa's Elestrals get +1 attack and 1 defense when a player casts an Ursa Elestral. You can enchant 1 spirit to this Ursa Den. You can disenchant 4 spirits from this Ursa Den in order to special cast an Ursa Elestral from your hand or deck. And it has the Ursa subtype on this rune, so it's searchable with Ursical, and it's the first rune with an Elestral subtype, which is interesting, not to say the least. But the big thing is this will allow you to get your 3-drop out for getting your Cubs out, which is the biggest issue in set 1, is if you wanted to get Ursa out, you had to basically play all your Cubs, sack all your Cubs into Ursa. So this will let you get Ursa out or Papa Bear out for basically 7 spirits, which is about on par with all the other special cast 3-drops, like Stratamoth is 5 but takes 2 turns. The Tarbor takes a bunch of spirits, it takes 6 I think because you need to cast an artifact, so it's about on par with all the other special Ascension 2 3-drops. But this also allows you to have a wide board and then drop the 3-drop behind it. If you start turn 1 with Ursa Den, Ursmog into some other, like say Ursa, you basically go Ursa Den, Ursa, and then sack your Ursa Den, drop Papa Bear, Mama Bear into play right then and there. So it does get you out some threats pretty quickly. It is expensive, so you're going to need to run recovery in the deck of some way. There's no Ursas with recovery right now. Maybe we'll see that in the future, but this is very, very good at getting out your Ursas. And the fact that you can disenchant any element of spirits means you could potentially just Nexus any spirits to this and then disenchant all 4. So if you're playing props to Rat King in Discord with this really, like, this is King Combo levels of jank, but you can basically play Ursa Den, Aeolus, Search Exaltair, play Exaltair, Nexus 2 from Aeolus to Ursa Den, burn for 2, pop Ursa Den, special cast Glassa Ursa, attack for basically 5 and throw 3 eruptions at your opponent and deal like an absurd amount of damage on turn 1 at the cost of like all your life. But it's hilarious, I love it. But yeah, this is going to probably see some play with some Nexus decks. Like, it could potentially be a little bit of a tech card in some weird Nexus decks where it's like you Nexus stuff to get some benefit and then pop it so it's not as hurtful losing the 4 spirits, and then drop a 3-drop into play that's aggressive or whatnot. Like Kinleo, Nexus Ursa Den, pop something, drop a bear into play, or Frost Nexus or Nexus to it, pop something. Like, there's some interesting gameplay you can do with Nexus and this card, which I think is really fun and interesting, where it doesn't need to be used in a pure Ursa deck. You could run it in some weird Nexus deck to just drop out 3-drops out of your deck, which is super interesting. So Ursa Den's really, really cool. It's probably the coolest card out of everything we've seen so far. And now let's get into the Papa Bear. Glassa Ursa, a 14/4 for 3 frost. This Glassa Ursa deals piercing damage. When this Glassa Ursa enters battle with an Elestral, you can suppress that Elestral. So starting with piercing damage, That's if you're attacking a defense Elestral that has, say, 1 spirit, you're still going to do 2 damage to them, as if they was in attack position, basically. So anything it attacks, it's attacking and dealing damage as though it was in attack position and battling it. I think that's fairly straightforward. I know there's a little confusion there. Then the very interesting, and it seems like, oh, that makes sense, and then once you get into it, like, wait, that's actually really, really a lot better than you think. That suppress Elestrals that it's battling with. So if it attacked or is attacked by an Elestral, it instantly suppresses that Elestral, and the Elestral stays suppressed for as long as it's in play. So if your opponent attacks your Ursa in defense with a Vertaqua, the Vertaqua will trigger, it'll still pop Ursa, but Ursa will permanently make that Vertaqua suppressed for the rest of the game. If a Spinous Sect attacks a Ursa, the Spinous Sect is now suppressed, it has no ability to rest. Like, no matter what you do, if you're attacking Ursa and somehow live in the battle, or are attacked by Ursa and somehow live that battle, you are suppressed for the rest of the game until that card leaves play. If your Pantera attacks Ursa and then it gets blown up by an earthquake, bye bye Pantera. You're not gonna, you know, that's the big thing. It just permanently suppresses whatever it battles, which is really interesting. And that helps a little bit when, like, maybe you're getting PTA'd or something, so you can still, like, it's, I don't know, it's generally, if it's attacking, it's killing what it's attacking, and that's good. The just permanent suppress is really interesting. It's probably not going to come up that often, but when it does, it's going to probably be really interesting to see how that plays out. But the big thing is, it's just a 14 attack, piercing, so it's always going to deal damage as long as it connects. And if you play this with, like, behind like a Helios, right, you're going to connect, you're going to pop something, you're going to deal damage to your opponent. Opponent now has to respond back to you, so it's going to be a decent card. It is going to be expensive to get out unless you use the Ursa, which is still going to be expensive to get out. It's just faster. So I think it's a good card. It's just not great. It's kind of in the Pantera range of, like, yeah, it's big and scary, but the issue is you get it out and then what? Your opponent shields it, right? Or your opponent Gorgons it or something. Like, there's ways to deal with it that aren't going to be super, like, dangerous for your opponent to use to deal with it. So it's probably just about Pantera levels of crazy. The biggest thing with it, though, is if you play it out with Ursa, it means you got 2 other Ursas in play that turn. So at least you have a little bit more of a board state. So your opponent's on removal of this. Maybe you have 2 Abominable Ursas still, stuff like that. So it's an interesting card. I do really like it. And that'll be the end of the spoilers for today. I went through it pretty quick because it all kind of meshes together, makes sense together. I don't think Ursas are going to be seeing a ton of competitive play with what the tools they have here are. Depending on what the fabled counter rune in set 2 is, it might help the kind of Helios Papa Bear strategy. But I don't see bears doing super good things just because their stats are still low. Even with Ursa, their stats are still kind of low, where their best 2 attackers are 4 attack and 4 attack, potentially 6 attack with Ursa and Abominable Ursa plus 1 other Elestral in play. That's generally not great enough. I know we saw some success with, like, Zeus and bears, so maybe you play, like, a Frostfire with a Splash of Thunder for Zeus to help the stats go up. So there's some hope for bears. If they ever get into a top cut, it'd be like, oh yeah, I see why they got into the top cut. They're just probably not getting top cuts anytime soon, unless someone comes up with some really fun text for them. Like, again, I think that Aeolus Exaltair Bear Den tech is really fun and interesting, and can definitely blow out a game if you get, like, the God Hand for it, but the odds of you getting that great hand are like King Combo's levels of stupid. But fun. Stupid fun. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.